Welcome to Applying for Graduate Studies in STEM Fields. My name is Katrina Gilmore, and I'm the Director of the Center of Career Education and Community Engagement. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Chris Krugh, Associate Professor of Geology and Director of CSUB's Master of Science in Geology program. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Krugh.
Well, thanks for joining me, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about personal statements and resumes, and actually for the sciences, generally that means a CV, a curriculum vitae. And so this is really something where you can, as it says, show your success by different disciplines, and sciences is what I'm going to be focused on. So the personal statement, what is a personal statement? Well, the personal statement is really a document or a file that provides information about why you want to pursue a graduate degree, in particular, a degree at the institution that you're actually applying to. It can be relatively general. It details your interest in the program, but it also outlines your long-term career goals. So for your details in the interest in the program, why do you want to get a master's or a PhD? Are you interested in this field? Like, what field are you interested in within that discipline? What brought you there? Why are you interested in that? For your long-term career goals, are you looking to become a professor? Or are you looking to get some additional experience to help you with your job, to improve your career outlook, so other jobs that you can apply for and become eligible for? These are things that go in the personal statement because they really help inform the faculty that are looking at these to make decisions about whether we admit you, or maybe what level of degree that we want to support you if we have support in terms of funding, but also to whether we admit you to some programs have a non-thesis track, others have just the thesis track. That can make a difference on which one we might want to admit you to. And so this gives us a lot of information. This is what's important here is in an application, this is one of the only places where you really get to drive the narrative. You actually get to explain why you're interested, what you want to do, and what the goals for you are in getting a graduate degree. So when is a personal statement used? And you'll find that actually a personal statement can be used in a number of different scenarios, all within the applying to graduate school process. So one of the first places you're going to use something similar to a personal statement is in an initial email to a potential graduate advisor or research mentor. And many of you may not have done this, or you haven't done this yet. I would encourage you to do that, is to actually reach out to potential faculty members that are in your area of interest, to send an email to see if they're accepting people into their lab, if they have funding, what types of projects they're working on, to get some more information. In this, you should have a sort of shortened, abbreviated version of a personal statement, where you're kind of explaining, this is what I'm interested in. I want to learn more about this, to go into this field. I'm interested in the type of research that you do. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Are you accepting graduate students? I'm interested in potentially joining your lab. You want to limit that in an email to about a paragraph, maybe 2 short paragraphs at most, because faculty are busy. They don't necessarily have enough time to read tons of emails. They may not respond immediately to your email. In fact, it may drop off the radar if they're getting lots of emails. So if you don't hear from them, try back give it a week and then try again, and just say, I was just following up with this email. And then if they don't hear back, then you might continue looking at other faculty members and things like that. So this is one place where it shows up, and it's an abbreviated version of a typical personal statement. A full personal statement tends to show up in the application for a graduate degree program. And when I say a full personal statement, this is generally a page to maximum 2 pages. The shorter are really the better, just because we want to see we don't want to spend so much time reading through many of these, especially we have quite a few applicants. So you want to have it short, concise, and to the point. It's helpful. It also does show us your writing abilities, so it's important to keep that in mind. And in science, we tend to try to be concise as much as possible, in our writing anyway. This sometimes in different disciplines can come up as the personal statement can actually be used in a number of different ways. In some disciplines, they tend to have request a cover letter for your application. And so the information that goes into a personal statement might be tailored to a cover letter for your application. You're explaining that you're applying to the non-thesis program in geology, and you're interested in doing that because you want to gain experience in a certain field to help employment opportunities in the future. You're really interested in this and you're excited to start the program. That type of information shows up in a cover letter, but you may also see that they'll request separate files for you to upload in terms of, sometimes it's called a statement of purpose or a personal statement. And sometimes they'll actually have a separate statement of research interests. In the Department of Geological Sciences here at CSUB, we actually require two statements for people that apply to the non-thesis program or the thesis track. We require a personal statement. Those that apply to the thesis track, we also require a statement of research interests because they're the ones that are going to be working hand in hand with a faculty member. And so we want to know what your research interests are. Why are you interested in that? How excited are you about research in this area to really kind of help us make those decisions. Another place that this shows up and where it can actually be really important is in requesting letters of recommendation from faculty members, from maybe employers. It's actually a useful thing to send them not only your personal statement and your CV when you ask them to write a letter, because they may not be aware of all of the things that you've done. And so this actually can refresh their memory if they did know, but it also may help them see you in a different light, in a stronger sense. And so they can actually write you better letters of recommendation when they have this information. I highly recommend including it with the email where you're asking, requesting letters of recommendation, or if you've talked to them about getting a letter, send this to them separately as a sort of a reminder. So it can be really useful in that case as well. So what are the goals of the personal statement? In terms of research, so in science, many of us are going to be trying to apply to go into a research lab, to join a research lab, to work with maybe a faculty member pretty closely in terms of doing a thesis, doing some thesis research. So in this case, the personal statement really should demonstrate that you've done your basic background research in not just the graduate program, but also on the different faculty members that are there, and particularly the ones that you may likely do research with. One of the things that sometimes this helps clarify is that we may get applicants from all over that really are just sending us an application. We're maybe a backup school, or they are sending out 15 different applications, and they haven't really looked into our school very much, and we may not actually even be a great fit for them. We're more interested in the people that have actually spent the time to look into the program, to be interested and preferably be excited about coming to CSUB to work with us. So we're looking for things where maybe you've identified a faculty member or even a couple faculty members whose research interest is closely aligned with yours. You may not have a great handle on what you're exactly interested in. That's okay. If you're interested in a couple different areas, talk to each of those faculty members, and there may even be crossover between them. So it's important to identify the faculty members, at least in a general area that you're interested in, and reach out to them to actually see what they're working on and if they're taking students. And so we actually look for that, especially for the thesis track. You won't necessarily have much of a chance if you haven't talked with one of the faculty members, because we really require that a faculty member is willing to take you on as a student, to mentor you, and to have some facilities and potentially some funding to support you in your research. If you haven't talked with a faculty member, it can make that difficult. And so you're likely to be sort of considered for the non-thesis track rather than the thesis. So if you're really interested in the thesis, definitely talk with faculty members. To reiterate that the personal statement is where you're highlighting your strengths and providing evidence that you're going to be a successful graduate student. It's your narrative. You can sort of tailor this paragraph or this page of information to suit you, and preferably to also fit the program that's there, to show that you're a good fit not only that we offer things for you that's going to be useful for you, but that maybe you can bring stuff to the to help the faculty members' research, to be of benefit to that. So some of the things that we look for when we're reading personal statement is we want to see that you have a strong work ethic, that you're self-motivated and actually excited about doing research, that you're really interested and motivated to continue at the graduate level, and that you're able to sometimes work long hours and get through tough assignments, because that is a part of graduate school. It's not always that way, but it kind of goes in waves, and we want to see that people are able to handle perhaps some adversity in their background and going through school, and so that's something that we look for, that you can handle some difficult situations as well. We're looking for ability for you to work independently as well as part of a team. So you're likely to join a lab or a group of people doing research. So it's best if you're able to work with other colleagues, other students, as well as different faculty members. You're going to have a committee, a thesis committee, perhaps if you're working on a thesis. And so being able to work with different faculty members is a really valuable skill, as well as other graduate students working directly with them to help each other in the lab. That's an important aspect of graduate school. But we're also looking for you to be able to work independently. So graduate school is a little different than undergrad in that much of what you learn is sort of self-directed. We're going to guide you and sort of push you in certain directions and give you some pointers of where to go. But a lot of the work that you do is actually really independent, in independent study, independent research on different topics. So the ability to do that, some experience doing that, is good to mention and to talk about in the personal statement. And of course, if you have any previous research experience, that's a big plus. If you don't, that's okay. You might consider trying to. So if you're thinking of applying in the future to graduate schools, I'd recommend trying to get some research experience, work with faculty, try to, as an undergrad, go work in someone's lab, try to just get some experience there, because that's something then you can put in the personal statement that really helps identify, one, that you're interested, that you do have some experience, you are able to work on a project, and potentially get a publication or a presentation at least out of this as part of this. In science, that's really the currency that we deal with, our publications and presentations. And so it's great to have a student apply that already has some experience doing it. The personal statement is also a place where you can address maybe some shortcomings in your record. If perhaps your GPA is maybe not quite as high as you'd like it to be, or if it's maybe just close to the minimum GPA value where the program might say that's their minimum value, but not quite there, you can address that in your personal statement. It's generally towards the end of the personal statement where you say, early on, maybe I had some difficulties in my studies. I worked really hard to overcome those difficulties and have made quite a bit of change through that. My major courses I've done extremely well in since that time, and I'm dedicated to improving this and continuing to improve as a student. You can give information that normally we wouldn't see if we're just looking at your transcript. So we see maybe some poor grades here and there. We don't know what necessarily you've been going through. We don't necessarily need to know the gory details of that, but a statement saying that I've focused on sort of turning that around, or really focused on this, or I had a difficult time that I went past. This is something that you can mention in the personal statement. Again, you don't need to go into too much detail, but it is a place where you can address that.
Dr. Krugh.
Yes.
I have a question here from a student. He says, hello, I'm an environmental science major at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I have a concentration in environmental management and a minor in business administration. This past summer, I gained research experience with stormwater management over the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone. I have heard many pros and cons about thesis versus non-thesis routes for master's degrees. I am interested in sustainable urban development and possibly renewable energy sources. Would a thesis route help to enhance my studies?
So the main concern so it depends on field to some extent. In the geological sciences and in the environmental sciences, part of where we look at what we consider as sort of the non-thesis track or the thesis track, the non-thesis track is really for people, we consider it a professional degree. It's where you're going out and you're going to be working then in consulting, potentially in government in some cases, or in industry. So environmental consulting would be one field there. Construction and things like that would also be sort of where you would be going through there. We actually encourage people to get, if they're going through the non-thesis track, to go for professional licensure in their field. And we actually require that in geology, that you're at least making the first steps towards doing that. So we consider the non-thesis track a professional degree. Some fields may require that you actually do a thesis, or so it kind of depends on the discipline. For the thesis track, we really consider that for someone that is going either continuing on to a PhD to go on to academia, or where you need additional research experience. So if you were interested in working for a government agency, doing a research-based position, so in a research lab, or even in industry, in the oil industry, and there's research labs in all the different major oil companies, they are pretty much going to require a thesis. So it sort of depends on your career track and your interests on which one you would follow. I would recommend talking with faculty to get their opinion, as well as seeing if there are people in industry that you can talk to get their opinion locally, because that can make a difference. We'll continue on with then looking at the CV, or the resume, or the curricula vitae, single curriculum vitae. In the sciences and in STEM, the curriculum vitae tends to be the way in which we look at that, and that's just sort of the difference. There would be sort of the emphasis on how you break that out, sort of more focusing on the education and research experience over the employment experience. But they're both contain very similar pieces of information. So the curriculum vitae is just the Latin for course of life. And it's really just a summary of a person's education and experience. We use a CV for a couple of different aspects. It's really sort of a concise, quick way to get a gauge of what a person has done in terms of studying and getting their degree track. It quickly, depending on the information that you put there, can quickly convey that you've done some research, that you're involved in the discipline, and we'll go through some of the pieces of information that you can put down a CV to help do that. So CVs are useful throughout your career. I have a CV that I continuously update and add to, and we'll see that we can use it in many different cases. So when is a CV needed? Again, this is throughout the application process for going to graduate school. This shows up in many different locations. The first is, again, this is something you can attach to your email when you're contacting a potential graduate advisor or mentor. It allows them to just kind of see your background really quickly without having to go and dig for that information elsewhere. They can actually see that relatively quickly. Most applications, I know we require a CV that you actually submit with your application, with the other pieces of information that we require. It's actually often common for grants, both through maybe NSF or other sort of society grants and research grants for graduate students, often require that you submit a CV. And this kind of can go towards your looking at the experience that you have doing research, and is just a good habit to do. When you get into continuously to do research, so looking at NSF and things like that, they definitely require, and they have a sort of fixed format for their CV, or an abbreviated form. You have to follow pretty carefully. This is another thing that you can include when you're requesting that someone write a letter of recommendation for you. This is useful for allowing that person to sort of see some of the highlights of what you've done, in addition to your personal statement where you've described things. So this will quickly remind them. They can use some of this information when they're drafting their letter, and it tends to help them make your letter stronger. So it's a really good thing to do when you're requesting letters of recommendation. And I usually request that students will send me one of their CV if they ask me to write a letter. And if you end up doing a thesis, it's often a part of your thesis. It often shows up as one of the appendices. And so it's something that you need to have anyway. So it's a good thing to get in the habit of starting and continuously updating. What is the format of a CV? This can be highly variable, both through discipline as well as individual preference. There's some key things that kind of show up, and we'll go through those. Important thing is that it's well organized. It's not sort of chaotic and scattered, that it's easy to read and concise. For the purpose of a graduate application, 2 to 3 pages is plenty for a CV. Any longer than that, and it's kind of you're probably at that stage in your career trying to pull things in and kind of puff it up a little bit. So it's better to be concise and keep the information that's in there really relevant to purpose of applying to graduate schools. The events or activities that are in there, so the different degrees that you have, or even the coursework that you have, often will show up there in reverse chronological order, meaning that your most recent event or activity that you had shows up first, followed by older objects or events. I would highly recommend that you look for examples of CVs from your current faculty that you deal with, as well as look at maybe some other students. You can also go to most faculty will have a CV linked on their website or somehow linked on the departmental website. So if you're looking to apply to work with a faculty member, you may go look at their CV and see how they actually have it laid out. And look at a bunch of them, see what you like, see what kind of works, see how they have these laid out, and then kind of model yours after some of those that you see, especially those in your field, because they may change a little bit. And it's important to know that the CV, as well as the personal statement, should be customized for each use that you're doing. So if you're applying to work in a tectonics lab, it may be different than something that you're doing if you're applying to work in a earth surface processes geomorphology lab. The focus might be there, might be slightly different. In the CV, that may not change a whole lot because they tend to be fairly straightforward. The personal statement's going to be likely change a little bit more. So here, this doesn't necessarily show up so well, but you can see this is an abbreviated curriculum vitae from that is mine. Where I have some pieces of information. I have my current address up on the top. I've got my education experience down below. I then have different employment positions, professional positions that show up here. In this case, academic positions. I don't have all of my different positions in here. This is sort of a focus just on the academic side of things, and since I basically had sort of professor positions. I also have then some peer-reviewed publications, a partial listing of those just since 2017, as well as some conference presentations that are there from myself and my students that are working there. So these are the types of information that show up on a CV. You can see that we try to lay it out consistently with sort of sections that show up. So I'll go through here. In my CV, and an abbreviated CV is generally 2 to 3 pages, 2 pages usually. But a full CV could be 10, 15 pages as your career extends, that the CV gets longer. So what information should be included in a CV? Well, the basic contact information is important. So in case we want to get in touch with the student that's applying, the name, address, phone number, and email are all things that are important to include. Other information like a profile picture, personal website address, social media info, these can be included, but it's best that they're relevant. So if you have a website where you actually talk, so if someone's applying for geology, that they have geology of my geologic history or something like that, that they have on their website, that would be something that would be relevant to include. You want to make sure that the address is not is sort of a professional style, especially with email. That's actually important. I would use your undergraduate email if you have one still, access to that. A .edu email address is good to include. If you have a sort of a Gmail or other like email server, make sure that the address is professional rather than kittens123 or something like that. You want to make sure that it's a professional address. Profile pictures are, some disciplines they tend to have them, others don't. Be careful there because you don't want to invite any chance for bias to really kind of show up, but they can be included. In my experience, it's generally not common to include a profile picture, but I know in some disciplines they actually do. Other pieces of information that's really important is your education history. So any university or college that you've attended is good to include, and again in reverse chronological order. The degree that you've received from there, so in our case of Bachelor of Science in Geology. The date the degree is awarded is good to have, so we can see sort of how recent that degree is or how recently you've been working there. The title of a thesis, if you have one, a senior thesis, or even if you're applying for PhD programs from a master's degree, the thesis title is actually something that's really important to put along with your education history. And if you do have that, putting thesis advisors down, so we may actually know the thesis advisors that you have, and then we can be like, oh, this is a student of so-and-so. That actually can help your cause in some cases. So that's something to consider putting in there if you have that piece of information. If you don't, that's okay. Not everyone does. Not everyone requires a senior thesis. And so then in that case, you would leave that information off. At the bottom there, I have you can include your major or cumulative GPA. You have to be a little careful there. If you're above the lower limit, but just right at it, I would choose either your major or cumulative GPA, the higher one to put there. Hopefully it's your major one. If your cumulative one is over the limit, you can put that as well. This is something that if you need to address in the CV or in the personal statement, you can have that in there as well. If you're a little bit below the limit or right at it, maybe you leave that information off so it's not sort of a glaring piece of information in the CV. But if it's there and you have a good GPA, it's something to put down. Any relevant employment or experience that you have, generally in terms of academic employment or regular employment. So research or teaching assistantships are good to put down because you may be considered for a teaching assistantship at the graduate level. These can be competitive, as well as a research assistantship. These can be competitive. So any sort of employment experience that you have as a RA or a TA can be really important to include. If you worked in the field that you're in, that's great. It shows that you're sort of interested in the field. You have some experience, and you may even have some contacts that can be useful for a faculty member that you're working with, or for yourself as well. So it's important to include that information. That's really good information to include. Internships are another great thing to put down. That all should show up in there. As well as if you have an official position in a club or organization. So even a president of the geology club at CSUB is something that can go down in that type of category. And that shows that you have some organizational experience, you some leadership experience. Those are all types of things to include. You can include other employment experience if you can use it to demonstrate some relevant skills. So maybe working in fast food industry, maybe that doesn't have anything, but if you were a manager or have some sort of leadership experience, that might be something to put down so that you kind of can show that you have perhaps a maturity level that you're able to be a supervisor, that is actually good information to allow the faculty member to know about. So, or any technical experience, like if you've worked in geographic information systems, so doing computer-based GIS work, that can be really useful in terms of, for many actually science disciplines, that can be quite useful. So that type of information would be great to include. Research experience is a big one, especially if you're applying for a thesis program. Any research in terms of a senior thesis or even an MS thesis can be great to include. Any research assistantships that's there, or any research experience with undergraduate program that you might have participated in. If you don't have research experience, again, this is something that if you're going to be applying to a grad program in the future, try to get some research experience if you can. Talk to faculty to do that. If you do have research experience, include it in the CV and include a small description of what that actual research experience was. So you might include a couple sentences that describe what you did, what you found, and perhaps if you gave a presentation somewhere on that information that you learned, that you researched. You can even include a major research project as part of a course. In that case, you want to give a little bit of explanation on what you actually did as part of the course, what course it was, and perhaps the instructor for that course. In this case, we also would want to include any publications or presentations that you have. Research publications should be really front and center. That's great information. Very few people applying to graduate school from their undergrad, they generally are not going to have a research publication. If they do it's really important and great to include. You may have our conference presentations. These could be professional conferences, even at the national level, or even at the sort of regional or local level. These are great to have because they show that you're presenting work that you've done. They're really important to include. And also university research presentations. So generally university-wide. So at CSUB, we have something called this Student Research Scholars competition. This is a small research projects that then people present their work on at the end of the semester, at the end of the academic year. This is something that can go on there because it shows us that you have presented your work, you've completed a project and essentially presented that work at a conference. So relevant certifications and skills, these are some skills that maybe you have that are unique, that are useful for the research group. They're really good to put down. This tells a faculty member that maybe you have special skills that we don't necessarily have to train you on or put as much effort into training you. So they're kind of saying that you already are coming with this level of information. Any certificates that you have, so GIS certificates, any other types of certificates are good to include. Any skills that you have in the laboratory. So if you are able to, so in geology, to rock crushing, polishing, and thin section making, those types of things are all good to put down. Not everyone has those types of skills. Any software programs. So if you are able to use GIS or you're proficient in Microsoft Excel, that's all good information to have. Not everyone is. If you have some programming or website development, so computer programming or website development, that can be useful. Programming is useful in many cases in doing statistical research. So if you're able to program using R or MATLAB, those types of things are pretty useful. If you have some website development experience, actually presenting your work online, that actually can be really useful. Developing a lab web page can be pretty attractive for someone that may not have that or is looking for students that do have that capability. And generally, if you are able to speak, read, or write different languages, you can put those down, because that may be useful if you're doing field work in an area where English is not the primary language. That can be, of course, very useful. So put those down. You can also include other skills and hobbies. I caution that you keep them to sort of relevant type things. So in geology, relevant ones might be hiking, that you have some hiking and camping experience for doing field work. Maybe in engineering, if you are working with drones or something like that, that can also go in there and be useful. But if they're not really relevant, I kind of keep those limited or not include them in your CV. towards the end of the CV, if you have some space still, things that you can think about including are honors and awards. These are actually really good because they kind of show that you've been evaluated and found to be at high caliber. If you've received research grants or merit-based scholarships, all of that information can go in there, and you can actually give a 1 or 2 sentence description of what that award entails and what it means. Any academic competitions where you've presented and either been awarded received an award, that information can go in there as well. And then finally, what actually helps us see that you're involved in the discipline, interested in the discipline, and really considering yourself sort of developing as a person as part of the profession, as sort of professional development. As a student, if you're registered with a professional organization, most disciplines will have a national organization. So the American Chemical Society, the American Geophysical Union, all of these are national and even international organizations that are devoted towards people doing research, studying, working in that discipline. So they're good to list. Even listing since when you've been a member since is often done. But you don't always have to just have the big organizations. You can have the smaller regional organizations, the sectional ones, the Western section for the Geological Society of America, the Pacific section. Those types of things are also there. And they tend to have the smaller conferences where you can present it. But also we have local groups. In town here, we have the San Joaquin Geological Society. That's actually good for networking locally. That information is actually there because it is useful to have, because it shows that you have some interest, you're active in the discipline, and that you're really likely to continue doing that at the graduate level, showing that interest, being motivated to continue on. And then, of course, any university clubs or groups that are relevant. Geology Club for geologists, Chemistry Circus, I think the CSUB is one of them. So there's a bunch of different clubs that you can join. And so that's the type of information that really goes in the CV. For both the personal statement and the CV, I would highly recommend and encourage you to actually run it by a faculty member that you maybe are asking about if they would write a letter of reference for you, or your advisor or something like that, to actually run both of those documents by a faculty member to get some feedback on them. They may give you some pointers on how you can improve that CV and that personal statement. But other than that, it's basically, these are ways in which you're sort of promoting yourself, just demonstrating your successes and demonstrating that you're likely to continue that, and trying to encourage people to take a chance on you as a graduate student. Thanks.
What are some of the common errors that not errors so much, or common things you may see on a personal statement that maybe are not in the best light? What are some common mistakes that people do with personal statements?
Personal statements, what's really common is someone will say, I've been interested in geology since I was a young child, on doing it. That's okay to include, but generally you want to start with, I'm interested in applying to CSUB to work to get my master's thesis or my master's in this field of geology.
Right.
You can include the information down at the end and keep it brief, because it, to some extent, it's relevant, but it's not necessarily super important,
right,
for me to know about.
Okay.
But that's actually really common, and so it's better to start with, what are my goals? Why am I applying to this grad program? And what are my career goals following that?
Gotcha. So there are people that maybe overshare.
Yes.
Or yes, I can totally see that. So for people that are completing the CV, also that's another thing. That could be another question. Common mistakes you see on a CV.
So the CVs are usually not too far off from it. Most people have when they're applying for grad programs, have probably run a CV by a faculty member before.
Gotcha.
Maybe a little less to the personal statement. So I would actually recommend doing both. and the personal statement can be tailored a little bit more, but you can really make those a lot stronger. So I really do recommend you run that by a faculty member. For CVs, they tend to be the errors or the ways in which they maybe not as strong is that they'll kind of, I mentioned they sort of fluff them up a little bit by sticking pieces of information in there that don't really need to go in.
Right.
So remember, keep things relevant that are getting put in the CV.
Okay. What do you think about, do you write recommendations for students that you really had very little interaction with? Or do you, so let's say they send you a resume or a CV saying, I'd like you to recommend me, but maybe you haven't had as many experiences with that student. Is that something that you do, or?
Generally, I would want to know, I would hope that I know a little bit more about the student.
Okay.
So it's kind of a gamble if a student would ask a faculty member that maybe they don't know so well.
Right.
You may not know what type of letter that they're going to write.
Right.
That's one place where a good personal statement and the CV can actually help your case a little bit, because we see the information there as well, and we're like, okay, well, this, I don't necessarily maybe remember the student so well, or I had some interaction with them, but I didn't know about this piece of information.
Okay.
This is actually really good, and so you can kind of use it to guide how you're writing that letter, in the context of what you know about the student. So I'm not going to just go off of the CV that's there. I will talk about what I know.
Experience, right. Right. Okay, we do have a question. So it says, what is the general rule of thumb length for a CV? I've heard some resumes for environmental science can be more than the 1-page rule of thumb, but what about CVs non-major specific?
So non-major, so for me in general, the CV from a student that's applying to a graduate program would be 2 pages. So the first page is usually spread, because otherwise it gets really condensed if you're trying to put all of the information that potentially could go in there. So no more than 2 pages, I would say. If it's 1 page, that's fine, because but that may be something where if you're thinking about writing your CV and you're thinking about things that can go in there, you have to remember there's things, any awards that you've gotten can actually go in there. That can actually make it a little bit longer. So generally, you can play around also a little bit with font size. Don't go below 8, or actually 10 is pretty small.
Yeah.
So 10 to 12, I would say. But generally 2 pages is probably right where it's going to be. At 1.5 to 2 pages is probably where that's going to show up for most students that are applying.
Thank you, Dr. Krugh, for giving us tons of information, helpful information for our students.
Well, I hope it was helpful.
Yes, I was looking through it. We work with resumes over here at the Career Center all the time, and I was like, yes, all that, all those things.